hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the 50/50 Project podcast. I am so happy. The person that I have here today, she's very special to me. She's a very special guest, and that is my very best friend for
27 years.
That's a long time.
It is.
Very long time.
It is.
I am so happy you're here.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I wanted to have a friend on because I wanted to talk about just your experiences of being a friend and some of the things that we've gotten into, and we have some very funny stories to tell. So, Amber, let's talk about first meeting. We kind of have this joke that we bonded over being the first minorities in a very small school.
A very small school. I moved in 94, so I was 10.
Yes.
We met in 5th grade. And we kind of just bonded, especially over recess, because we were just kind of the outcasts. You know, we just kind of gravitated towards each other. Found out we had a lot more in common than just that. We both really loved reading.
Because people can't see you, obviously. You are Native American.
Yes.
And we were in a very predominant, I would say, almost all white school when we started.
Yeah, I do believe, like, in our, especially in our homeroom class, I was the only person of color, and you were the only. Yeah.
So we really just bonded over that. We've been friends since then.
Yeah. Been through a lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
We've we've done marriages, we've done kids,
Births,
we've
going to college, moves.
Yes.
A lot of stuff.
And I really have to thank Amber, because Amber was actually the first one a couple years ago that got me turned on to podcasts. She started listening to them and she was like, hey, you should listen to this. And then the more that I was listening, I told in my first episode that it really became this idea of wanting this platform for people with disabilities and their family members and things like that. And I really wanted to get because you've been with me for so long and such a good friend, I really wanted to spend a couple of months, especially when the elections and everything were going on. You and I were having conversations about how there really wasn't any mention of anybody with disabilities.
Right.
There was nothing out there. There was no information.
Right.
So you want to talk a little bit about that? You and I noticed in those conversations it wasn't even coming up when they were talking.
Right. They were covering most everything else in their platform and on their campaign and everything like that, except for people with disabilities. And then you had mentioned to me that you didn't see very much representation in Hollywood, in social media, on the news. And so you had come up with this idea for this podcast, and you had said to me, which I thought what really stuck with me was, if I don't see the representation, like, why don't I become the representation? Right. And I thought that was a fantastic idea.
And that was something you two, and we weren't hearing anything from either, we felt at either side.
Exactly.
At that time. And you had really taken up too, being Native American, you have children. So you really felt like that representation was missing also.
Right. And just, being able to be that representation for people who don't feel like they maybe always have a voice. Right. And know that they're not alone, and just bring insight to what it is like to be a minority and things like that. Some parts of our lives that people don't even realize are an issue become such a big issue. Right.
And one of the things when we were growing up that you and I always found so funny is people would say things about you being black and you weren't even black. Right. They didn't even know that
me, and not even get my race right. And so it was like, okay, if you're going to insult me, at least do it right.
Right. And,
yeah. And it was just, I always joke with my kids, because they've come into this problem before, too. Right. Where, they've been told, go back home. Well, we're Native American, so we've been here a long time. Right. And things
and there
like
is no go back home.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, for anybody, for any race. Yeah.
Exactly, because this is a melting pot of immigrants. That's how this country was founded. And so we always joked around that, people always say, they would assume that if you're not Hispanic or you're not black, there's no other races besides that in some people's eyes.
And they haven't gotten the appropriate platforms either.
Right.
Really.
Exactly.
And so you kind of took that up with your own kids. That started when all this was going on. And then we started talking about how we didn't see the representation for disabilities. And I think we were having a conversation. I'm like, I can't think of anybody.
Right.
That I'm seeing, I'm sure they're out there, but that I'm seeing on a regular basis.
Right.
And also where the disability isn't the main focus of what's going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just think, just bringing light to what every day looks like.
Yeah.
For people with disabilities.
A little bit about every day. I think one of the things that you really wanted to touch base on, because it still bothers her to this day, you guys, is the layout of our old high school.
Oh my gosh.
Because there was, so again, very small, and we did graduate from there. It ended up being a very positive experience, but you have to explain why this irritated you. Almost, you said with me being disabled, and I think all my friends and family are like this, some of the stuff irritated you guys more than it did me. So explain how you had to get to the lunchroom.
Yes. Okay. You can tell our building was very old, and that accessibility was a very old building, and accessibility was just an afterthought where they just kind of tried to fill in. We had a 4-level, really, if you think about it, high school.
We did. That's true.
Because the cafeteria was in the basement of the building. There was no good way into it, so they built this kind of makeshift ramp.
And it was outside. You had to go outside and go in a door that went down that ramp.
It was kind of tucked between or behind the English teacher's classroom. So in order to get to one part of the ramp, you had 2 options to go down it. You could interrupt her class, which was embarrassing because all eyes were on you the second that door opened.
And I should interrupt here and say, you have to remember, I did not have an electric chair at this point. So it was a manual chair. And if anybody goes down those, if you're disabled and you're listening to this, you know when you go down a steep incline, it pretty much crashes when you get to the bottom.
Yes, so you could go through the English teacher's classroom and interrupt and, try to get through as quietly as possible. Or the other option was to literally exit the building, walk through the parking lot, and enter in another door and go down this very narrow concrete hallway that they put in. And it didn't, if you think about what it's like in Iowa in the winter time, most of the time you're leaving the building in minus,
and it's not like you're going to put your coat on just to go across the building, because you had to go back into the building that way as well. Right.
And so we tried to haul, through the parking lot as fast as we could, not trying to wipe out at the same time.
Right.
Go back in the building, squeeze down this very narrow hallway, and then make a 90-degree angle around this corner to squeeze down the other half of the ramp, and then another 90-degree angle through the door.
And it was impossible.
It was a big, heavy metal door.
And then what also happened is the school that we went to, because the school started growing pretty quickly when we were there.
It did.
So they came up with the idea that we were going to have those 3 lunch periods ran back to back.
They did.
So we had a 5th period class, I don't know if you remember this, that they cut in half.
Right.
So you would either go the first part of the 5th period and then come back and take your lunch, and then you would come back for the last half. You would take it at the last part of it. So you had all these groups of people coming in up this little turn while we're trying to go down.
Right. And so, that was the other thing. We would have to leave just a little bit early just to try to get to the lunchroom before the crowds. But then we would never quite make it. And
nobody stopped.
Nobody stopped. With the bell would ring, and a flood of high schoolers would just cram up that ramp. And they were literally
crawling over us to
trying to squeeze around us. Instead of just waiting for us to go by, they were literally climbing over you, trying to squeeze between your chair and the wall.
There were a lot of curse words happening, guys.
Yes, there were. I'm not usually one to try to keep things to myself, but I did let them fly a few times. And then it was nothing new. It was every single day. Every single day.
Right.
It's like they knew
always
you were
something
coming down the hallway. Or down that ramp, and they would use it anyways to try to take a shortcut to class.
Right. And also, one of the things that we got really mad about, I think it was our senior year, because there was all this stampeding, instead of thinking that through and really saying, maybe we should adjust the lunch period, they would make you, so there was a door that you had to go, and it was a really heavy red door that you had to go in. And they decided that you couldn't open the door until the bell rang. Right. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And Amber was like, that doesn't make any sense because she's going to be standing behind it.
Yeah. I forgot about that, actually.
And she...
Yeah, because they'd just be lining up.
Right, and then we would have... so we got to the point where we would just say, screw it, and we'd sneak in. Mm-hmm. But there was always a teacher aide or something that said, you need to keep the door closed. Right. And Amber was like, we're not keeping the door closed.
I know. The second that door opened, they were on you. It's those are the kind of things that I think a lot of people don't think about when it comes to just everyday kind of life.
Right.
Just trying to get to lunch.
Right. It was such a process. And it was too for us, and I think for us too, one of the things that was very funny, that could have been really dangerous, is we did have another boy and a couple other people that had disabilities that were in our
Yeah.
class, and the fire girls in high school. Do you remember
Yes.
this? So the school decided that they were going to have the teachers try to carry us down the steps because you couldn't use the elevator.
Right.
And you have to remember, and they wanted these poor teachers to carry us down
Right.
in our wheelchair. And I'm like, they're wearing heels. And Amber was like, this is the most dangerous thing ever.
I know, because then at some point, okay, so to picture this, we had a 4-story.
A lot of stairs.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's say we're on the 4th floor, study hall. The bell, fire drill goes off. You're not allowed to use the elevators. And these are big stairwells, big concrete steps that they want to carry you down. And at first the teachers, they're going to lean you back in your chair.
Yes.
Somebody's going to grab you by the handles. And the other person's going to lift you up basically by your foot plates, which are removable, by the way. And they're going to basically lay you back with your view being the ceiling and carry you step by step by step as other students are trying to rush around you.
Yeah.
That the teachers were not equipped to do that. They were going to enlist high school boys to do
And
it
I'm like,
for
no,
you.
thank you.
Yes, because I thought they were stronger and could do it easier.
Well, and I will say, the way that was in the wheelchair,
Right.
he actually had the right idea. He said, no way.
Right. And like I said, these were not like carpeted cushy stairs.
No.
They're hard concrete steps and 4 flights of them.
And you could tell that the teachers were nervous. They didn't want
Right.
to do it either.
Right. It makes it think that, it being such an older building that it was an afterthought.
Right.
Just trying to fill in the blanks and make it work.
Right. And one thing that I'm going to brag about Amber here a little bit, because I do love her very much, is the fact that I was disabled never really even entered into the conversation. I think we just took off, so we connected
Yeah.
so much. We had our little normal growing up things that we had
Right.
to do, but we both, I would say, probably like around the same year, 8th grade, 9th grade year, my parents were having a really difficult time. You were having a really difficult time with other stuff as well. We really just were there for each other. And the fact that I was disabled didn't even really enter the conversation. And there have been multiple times where you've forgotten what I have.
Right.
Or stuff like that, because you don't even think of me like that.
Right.
And I think
always
that's great.
felt kind of lousy as a friend, because I'm like, gosh, and I have to text you, okay, what is it again? Or call
Yeah.
you. And you would always remind me, and it's like, okay, it's not that I don't care by any means.
Right.
It's just that
It's that you care about me as a person, so
Right.
that's not an issue.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
What do you think was the biggest, especially as we got older, what do you think was the biggest eye-opener for you with me having a disability? What surprised you? Did you recognize those things, or were those really not even on your radar very much?
Well, and honestly, in aspects to our friendship, I mean, it was all just like my friendships with all my other friends,
Right.
we went to the movies, we went shopping, we were mall rats, we were at the
Right.
mall all the time.
That's what people did at that time,
Yeah,
guys. They just hung
exactly.
out at the mall.
I mean, and we basically when we were able to drive and do things like that, we just basically lived at Perkins,
Right.
Perkins
Yeah.
States and things like that.
We all summer,
Yeah.
at least once, twice a week, maybe.
Oh yeah, easily to
Yeah.
the point where the staff recognized
They
us. when
already
we
had
walked
our
in.
order ready when
Right.
we were off to go.
Right. And so, all those other things, I mean, they were just normal, but I did notice that when it came to our friendship, and I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to you, it did seem like you tried to almost, I don't want to say please me more, but tried to make, I think you
Yes.
felt,
When
I think you felt like you had to prove to me
that I was
that-
as normal as you were.
Yes.
Whatever that means.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And that you could be a good friend to me, and you always were an amazing friend. You were probably the best friend I've ever had in my entire
Right.
life.
Yes.
And
Thing I was taking on.
right, and I think you always thought that I was almost going to leave you behind
Right,
sometimes.
right.
And you were always trying to make sure that,
There was a lot of insecurity there.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were having
Yeah.
we've talked you were having a lot of
Oh, yeah.
insecurity too.
And
Not necessarily with me, but
No.
yeah.
Definitely. And I always felt like I just wanted to always make sure you knew that, I wasn't going anywhere.
Right.
And
And we figured that out.
Yeah.
Once we hit high school, we were like, okay.
yeah.
We're never going to be able to get rid of each other even if we want to.
I know, and I do remember, when it became time. Remember how I reacted when
Oh,
we
you were
found out
so
we were going to
upset.
college?
Oh my gosh, guys, she was so she was so happy / upset with me.
I know. It's like, what's going to happen?
When I left that summer, we spent so much time
Right.
together before I left. And that week or two before I left,
I was so scared she was going to like forget about me. But of course she didn't, because that's not who she is. And we made time to talk.
yeah. And
Almost
you were even
weekly.
living in a different town at that point.
Right.
I think you'd moved.
Yep, I had moved, and we still made it work, and we stayed close as ever, and
Yeah, here we are 20 something years later, which is nuts.
exactly.
One of the things that was funny for us is you just talk about like going to the mall or doing some of those
Right.
outings, and you couldn't believe how many people would like stare
Yes.
or like say crazy things.
Yes.
And
Oh
you
my
were
gosh.
like, I don't even know.
Eventually you just get used to it, but I mean, eventually, not always.
Right.
Not always.
Right.
But there was a lot of, what's wrong with you?
Right. And and you were very
Yeah.
all my friends, you were very defensive. Like
Yeah.
you were very protective.
Yes.
Yeah.
There, a lot of stares, a lot of, what's wrong with you? What does she have? Things like that. Even a lot of babying.
Oh yeah.
Where people don't think you're capable, pats on the head. Like, but with all of that, you do come across the people who take I don't know if you remember this, but I remember one time we were at one of the malls here, and I was having a hard time pushing you up the ramp, and I couldn't get you up the ramp, and all of a sudden, this man, or this, like, he's like an older teenager, he
Yes.
comes out of nowhere, he just grabs your handles, he's like, I got this, and he just zoomed you up the ramp
Right.
with all of his friends. And I was like, we were like so grateful for him because
He just came out of nowhere.
Right,
But we weren't used to that.
Right.
Because people wouldn't do that. I can't, and you have to remember, this was back when you didn't always have automatic doors.
Right.
Things were accessible. I'm using air quotes that you can't see.
Right.
And still, people's idea of accessible was, I'll take a regular bathroom stall and put a bar in there and it's accessible. But it's not a big...
Right. It's
and
still very small.
the ramps are there, but they're super steep.
Exactly.
And so we ran into a lot of that
Yes.
when we would go out, that we couldn't get through the doors. And like a lot of times, it sounds bad, but people would not stop to help.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think some of it might have been, well, do they want help? Do, things like that. But, if you ever just see somebody struggling, just say, hey, can I lend a hand really quick? And I was so grateful.
But so what do you think, because we obviously had other friends
Mm-hmm.
that we hung out with that we enjoyed just as much. What do you think did me being, I don't even know if minority is the right word or being different, do you think that you reacted to that as a connection because you were probably one of the only, if not the only at that time,
Yeah.
people that was of a different race?
Yes. I definitely feel like, that really helped our connection because we could both relate to each other.
Right.
You had been made fun of for your disability and things like that. I had been made fun of for the color of our skin.
Right.
But that was never an issue with either of us. Like,
No.
we never saw that about each other.
And we went out of our way to protect the other. Like, if somebody would say something to you that was
Oh, yeah.
race, I mean, I had no
You were
problem
on
saying,
them.
yeah.
Yes, you were on them, and I was on them to help with you, and like,
Right.
just, and my other friends, but I just haven't had the friendship that we've had. That's lasted.
Yeah. And I think when we were talking about me going off to college, I mean, I came home almost every other weekend, and I made sure
Right.
that you knew that I was still
Right.
there.
Right.
And we both had a lot of the same issues with our families as far as like not wanting to be left alone and things like that. So I think we reacted to that also.
I agree.
Yeah. What are some of the positives when because we've been talking a lot about the challenges and they're there, but what for you, we talked about our connection. Overall though, what do you feel like the positives of having a best friend who has a disability have done for you later in life? Because you have kids yourself now. She's an amazing mother, by the way. She does so good, and she has the cutest kids, and her husband's amazing. But what do you think, what were some of the positives that you were able to take from this friendship and still do?
Honestly, just, watching my teenage daughters go through being a teenager,
yeah.
Like we always joke, you couldn't pay me enough to be 30. And just watching her try to navigate her own friendships and then being able to show her, like, listen, would my best friend ever treat me this way? Or,
right.
would
You
I
have
ever
an
treat...
example you can use.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
And my children just love you to death,
Yes.
And so they always
I
get
am an
super
honorary aunt.
Yes.
So they
Yes.
can, yes.
And also just being able to see you as a strong, confident, disabled woman.
Right.
Goes a long way for them as well, because they can use your life as an example as the struggles that you've had to go through and come through, and how you've made such a great career for yourself, and you have this great friendship with everybody,
yes.
and and I just really like having that as an example for them, as for you. I mean, and you actually come up in conversation probably a lot more than you realize in our household.
So do you,
honestly.
Yeah. What is the biggest misconception that you think people have about me individually, but also just about that you've learned from all these years that you think people just are not getting?
I think that some people might think that you're not as independent as you actually are.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I remember you telling me the story about browning hamburger once.
Yeah.
You literally just browned hamburger. And
yeah.
somebody was like, wait, you cook for yourself?
On a stove.
Yeah, because we were talking about how you had used... I'm like thinking... Of course she can cook for herself. So I think that a lot of people just...
I'm not good at it, but I can do it.
Yeah, well, hey, I'm not good at it either, but I can do it as well. So, I think a lot of people just don't realize how independent you actually are. I mean, you've been to New York City. You did your internship in New York City.
I did.
You've been... How many times have you been down to Florida?
Right, yep. All right, yeah.
Mm-hmm. You went to college.
Right.
That has been
huge,
shocking to me when I tell them that you're a college graduate. I
don't
know what they think.
That always happens.
Yeah.
That always happens. And we've talked about that quite a few times. There were a couple of times where we would be out and about this summer before I went to college,
mm-hmm.
and they would ask me where I was going, and they would interrupt me before I could even get it out and just assume I was going to the community college.
Right.
Not that there's anything wrong with going to the community college.
No.
But normally you would ask people which college they were going to.
Right.
But it was almost like you picked up on the fact that people were just assuming that's where I would go because I would stay home.
A 4-year college,
right.
I was away from home.
But in reality, I was almost hours away.
Exactly.
From home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like you internshipped, you went to parties, you had friends in college,
right.
You're still friends with to this day,
right?
And you had a very normal college experience,
right?
And I think that to me was expected because I know you. But
right.
Then when I tell other people, they're like, well, how did she manage that? It's like, well, just like everybody else did.
There's still obstacles, but it was always there.
Right.
And I think, too, when one of the other things when we were talking about, and we do talk a lot because of our experiences, you as a Native American woman and me as a woman with a disability, we talk a lot about the lack of representation. Right. And that day that we were, to kind of go back to it, the day that we were having the discussion,
right?
And you said you really you couldn't think of like a romantic comedy where the person just happened to be in a wheelchair.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
because it just seems like it's just not something that people think about when it comes to traditional relationships.
Right.
That people with disabilities have traditional relationships,
right.
And things like that.
And there's been a couple times, like especially with dating, like you've tried to set me up on a couple dates and things like that, and you were surprised at their reactions to me being disabled.
Oh my gosh!
Because you didn't think it was an issue.
Never.
So and then and that really upset you too.
It genuinely upset me.
And it didn't really because I was not surprised.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think after it had happened a few times, and I hate even saying this because it really did upset me.
Yes, it did.
And then I remember one time didn't even mention that you were disabled. I had just talked about your personalities, your accomplishments.
And they were fine.
And everything. They thought you just sounded like such an amazing person. I'm like, oh my God, like why haven't you set me up with her before? And then I mentioned, oh, by the way.
And this happened a couple times.
Yes. She happens to be in a wheelchair. And I know you've heard this. I still hate saying it out loud because it just hurts my heart so much. But they were like, oh, I don't know if I can handle that. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, you don't have to handle it. She handles it just fine.
But you were more upset for me than I was for myself because I was not surprised.
Yeah.
I knew that was an issue.
Right.
And you just couldn't wrap your head around.
I know, because it was really upsetting that everything else sounded amazing to them. But when I mentioned your wheelchair last, it was like, I think there's a lot of misconception about what they think
they're taking on.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, no. She's independent. Like, she wouldn't have been able to do all those things I just listed if she wasn't capable.
Right. But it's that whole thing. And then
right.
she just eventually tried to stop trying to set me up with people.
I know, and it broke my heart, but you weren't. Those guys were.
No.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, no. But
looking back, it was actually a great thing that
it was
didn't
good.
work out.
It's all good.
Yeah.
But I think that's what's funny too about our friendship also, and I have other friends that are like, I don't get as upset about certain things that you guys do, and it's not because it doesn't bother me, but it's because I'm so used to it that I know how to handle it in kind of a funny way. You guys do not think it's funny at all.
No. I mean, sometimes I can laugh if I'm not there, if I'm hearing about it, but and it also, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that you just happen to have some pretty protective people in your life.
Yes. Absolutely.
And we want to protect you, and you do the same thing for me.
Right.
And
I don't really need you to protect, but you don't need me to protect you either.
Exactly.
And I'm going to do it regardless.
Exactly. It's like, I know my 17-year-old can handle herself, but like if somebody hurts her feelings, I want.
She is a mama bear, guys. I'm telling you. But to revisit our lunchroom in high school. You even there was a teacher that, I'm not going to say his name in case he's listening, but I don't know if you remember this, he would always be in the lunchroom or going to, and he would never hold the door.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh, I totally forgot about that.
She's like,
yeah. Okay, so, you're coming up this steep concrete ramp, after everybody's just trying to shove their way through, you've got like crotches and butts in your face trying to climb over you. And then you finally make it out. You go through negative 10-degree weather to get back into rushing through this parking lot, trying to dodge all the potholes and slick spots. You get back in.
God knows we can't repave anything.
Exactly. Exactly. So you get back in. You're coming down this hallway. You're finally feeling your feet and your hands again. And you see this teacher who is a higher up teacher and always lectures everybody on etiquette and being a good person. He literally looks over his shoulder at you, sees you coming. You're less than like 7 feet away. He walks through the door, looks at you, makes eye contact with you as he's shutting the door, and then walking away.
And there were a lot of swear words.
Yes, and I didn't even care if he heard. I didn't care that he was higher up and could probably have gotten me detention. I didn't care. I wanted him to hear. And after the third time of this happening, it was just
what Amber did. So she was whispering. She's like, he better not close that door. I swear if he closes that door and he closes it. Oh my God! He's a teacher. Oh my God. That was hilarious.
It was. And it happens so many times. And it's just one of those things where it just takes an extra 10 seconds.
Yeah, to be polite.
Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be a big thing, It's not like I don't know. I don't want people to feel like we think, oh, well, she's disabled. You have to hold the door.
Right. And it would be common courtesy.
For anybody.
Either way. And I'm like, and now looking back on it, I think too, and we've talked about this too, as a person with a disability or, a person that's growing up in an environment where maybe it's not as diverse as it should be, I thought I should be grateful that they have a ramp, even though it doesn't work or it doesn't make sense. I should be grateful that they're including me in these things when you don't really realize it needed to be a lot better.
Yes.
Even for that time. And that was 20 some years ago, but still.
Right.
And we're still seeing the same things today that we saw back then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I see it in restaurants, in movie theaters, and it's just small little things that you maybe don't think about, and it's not anybody's fault. because if you just don't have or somebody with a disability in your life, and so you don't think about it, it's something as simple. And I don't want to sound like self-righteous by any means.
Right.
Like we should get special treatment when we're in public, because
that's not. No, you're asking for regular treatment like everybody else. Yeah.
Regular treatment would be amazing.
Right. You know? Yeah. And I think, and like you said, we've also interacted with some very good people.
Exactly.
As much as we've had bad experiences, there have been very good ones.
Absolutely.
Like I remember at Perkins, like you said, they practically knew us by name. Like we always got that same guy, and he knew where to seat us, where not everybody would be. Because that's another thing that people don't realize. When Amber and I, or my other friends and I, would go out, it was always a process of trying, and it still is, frankly, in a lot of places, trying to find a table where we can sit, but we don't have people bumping into us all the time, or that I don't have to maneuver around.
Right. Yeah, and I do remember one time we were in the cafeteria at school, and I know a lot of this probably plays to age, but we had to try to weave our way through the tables to get to this door. And so, you get a lot of high schoolers crammed into a small cafeteria. People's chairs are pushed out, things like that. Well, I remember one boy in particular, it was the most direct way to the door.
He would go out, I think I remember who you're talking about. He would go out of his way to make it like...
Yeah, and so he did not want to even just like slide his chair even like 6 inches in and he had the room so that we could squeeze behind him and be like, because we were like 4 feet from the door.
Right.
And we were just like, hey, dude, can you please excuse us? We were being polite. We were saying, excuse me. And he was like, and he literally turned around, looked you in the eye, and told you to go the bleep around. Do you remember this?
Yes, I do.
Like,
I don't remember who it was.
I don't remember either, but he's like,
and you were
around.
Very upset.
I was like, that was it. I lost my mind. And plus, we were seniors and he was a freshman. So, I mean, come on. And so I remember I laid into him. And, so then, he eventually moved his chair in and we got around. And the point is, okay, it's like we are 4 feet from the door.
Right.
It's like, in order for you to go out
just move
all the way around, it was like, I think he felt like we were better and superior and that we, were asking, for special treatment. It's like, we just want to get to the door, dude.
Right. That's all we need to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, like, people would automatically assume, especially we stayed friends as we got older, which is a blessing in and of itself, because that doesn't usually happen. But I think, and we've talked about this too, people get into situations where they think they've got us figured out because there's this one thing that's different about me. Right. So you're Native American, so obviously your race would be an issue, but that's the only issue you have, which isn't true. There's a lot more. You still have a family behind you. You still have all these different things. Everything that everybody else goes through, people assume just because I'm disabled, that's all.
Right.
That's my biggest challenge. It isn't always necessarily the case.
Right. Right.
And I think we've talked about that too. That they just assumed that like, oh, well, she can handle it. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, I would agree with that. I think that a lot of misconceptions when it comes to people with disabilities and things like that's it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And and that's just not the case. And definitely, I would say, like, being a person with a disability, you're probably even more a minority than me, being a person of color.
Oh, I don't know about that.
I see a lot more people of color.
We argue about this all the time because I always say, like, I consider myself a white woman of privilege, even though I'm disabled.
So because I don't think of our differences in that way,
right?
Right. And so just and I'm lucky enough that, like, for the most part, race isn't really a huge factor in
now,
my life.
but it wasn't when we were young. It was when we were younger.
It was.
Yeah.
It absolutely was. I mean, I can tell you some of the nicknames that, like, some of the kids in school had for me.
And tell me about, because, like, I don't want this to be all about me, because, like, this is when I said, what's your 50? Right. So you really had a lot coming up against you. Not a happy kid for a lot of years because you were just miserable.
Yes. So, I did. Like, I was 10. Like I said, I had been raised by my grandmother for 10 years. I am a child of an addict.
Mm.
And you know that about me.
Yes.
And I've never met my biological father, but I am a child of an addict. And my relationship with my mother has always been
Fraught.
yes,
To say the least.
to say the least. And so I had a lot of issues coming from the town that I had been raised in, and I was very close with my grandmother.
She was
close.
a wonderful woman.
Yes,
Yeah.
I miss her dearly. I was very close with her, and so I just kind of, and like it didn't really dawn on me, and I remember that day that I was leaving behind everything that I had ever known,
Right.
and I was moving.
And you'll have to remember, when you left there,
Mm-hmm.
it was a little bit more diverse, but not much.
It was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was and because I can look back at my classroom picture.
Sure.
I actually just did this the other day of my 4th grade class, and there was probably 6 other students of color
Which for
there.
that time,
Right.
in that town,
Right,
yeah,
because we had a community college there, and so like
there were.
people,
It was yeah,
it was a decent size
Right,
in
but-
this case.
yeah. So the town that we grew up in is not the town that it is now.
Oh yes, no.
So it's completely different. Yeah.
yes, and so
When you made that transition.
that was very hard. I'd left behind my sister. I had left behind because only I left. My sister had stayed with my other relative, and I left by my sister, my cousins, my grandmother, all my childhood friends, and I had moved from my childhood home to live with my aunt and uncle, who were very great. They were amazing.
Yeah, they
for
did
taking
the best they could.
Yes,
Yeah.
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 And they didn't get an easy kid. I mean,
No.
I was dealing with a lot of childhood trauma.
Well, neither one of us is
Yeah.
easy.
Exactly. And-
Easy is not something you'd put next to our names, guys.
Yes,
I'm just gonna say that.
exactly. And so moving and just being uprooted and moving to a town that was pretty, like, I almost want to say country.
Yeah. I don't think, and I could be wrong here, because I know we did end up getting people of other minorities.
Mhm.
Eventually, the older we got, and the more
Right.
people started to move in. But still, you guys have to remember, it was not as diverse as it is
No.
now. You were still but you were very much, when you started at Grimes, you were very much on your own.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and luckily, Mr. Dupuy, I don't know if I can say his name.
Yeah, you can.
He was.
He was amazing
He was the best teacher that I could have gotten.
for that first year.
Oh my gosh, amazing. And then, of course, I met you, and then I met a couple other friends
Yeah.
that year that I had stayed with friends with throughout high school. We don't keep in touch so much as we do, me and you do, but
Right.
I was always grateful for their friendship because they never saw the color of my skin, and they would defend me when they would hear names, and things like that.
And if you want to talk, do you want to maybe talk about some of the names that they would misuse?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because because we're gonna educate people too on that. You know, because this is really too. When I say the 50-50 project, how much do you make out of that 50 that you're given?
Right.
You really had your 50 too. I mean, you were walking in, and there weren't a lot of people that were happy to see you.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and that just
And not a people that, and not even. I don't even know that I would say some of them were that I would love to name, but I'm too mature to do that. But there just wasn't a lot of knowledge, and it seemed really ridiculous.
Right. And so, I just remember, of course,
The
the
N-word,
N-word.
yeah.
That
was huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a big one. And a couple groups of boys, they of course thought I was Hispanic, even though I had told them numerous times that I wasn't. Their favorite name for me.
And you guys can't see her, and I'm not being biased here. She's absolutely gorgeous. She's just gorgeous. Yeah.
They would call me Nachos. Because they would just every time they saw me, they just thought they were the most funny people in the world. And I remember, because my husband is hilarious, okay? And so for the longest time, I had a really hard time telling anybody, even as an adult, that they called me Nachos. And I'm like, I don't even want to tell you what it was. It was so bad. It was so mean. And so he's like, okay, well, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to. So I'm like, they called me Nachos. And it broke. I was like, oh, it was traumatizing. And he's like, that's it. That's the best they could come up with. And it's like, okay, so fine, yeah. Then he made me realize, okay, they're idiots.
Yeah.
But they would call me Savage.
That's right.
Yeah, once they found out what I was.
But we did.
I do remember a couple of times bringing it up to a couple of teachers, and the whole thing was just ignore it. Ignore it.
Be the bigger person.
Be the bigger person and walk away.
Right.
Things
but
like that.
Here again, it's back on you.
Right.
As the person being made fun of.
Right.
to
Right. Yes, exactly. To somehow deal with it and somehow just
Right.
make light of it.
right.
You know, and I remember just there was this turning point in me because there was a couple of my friends that they targeted. You know, I think mostly like they were just bullies.
Right.
You know, and I remember it was in high school. I had literally had this mindset just switch in one day where I was like, I am not going to take this anymore, but I wasn't going to come at it in an aggressive way. I wasn't going to scream and,
Right.
and cuss and things like that.
Because you went through, you said you went through a stage where you were real angry.
Yes.
You were very angry.
Yeah.
You were angry about the fact that you had been put in that situation
Right.
for such a long period of time.
Right.
You were trying to figure yourself out.
Right. Just becoming a normal teenager.
And a teenager.
Yeah. That there was that I can just remember that point in high school where, like I said, like it was like a switch. And it happened for both of us.
Right.
Where we were just kind of like, I'm not going to do it anymore.
I'm not going to worry about,
Yeah.
you know.
And I remember it was something, and I'll never forget this. I know it sounds so simple, but these kids, you know, bus rides home, because we went to school in a different town, even though it was the same school district.
That's right, we
Our
did.
high school was in Dallas Center, but we lived in Grimes. So it was like a good 20, 25-minute bus ride home, for me at least. I know you took a separate bus, but that was just fair game for 25 minutes of
it's terrible. Yeah, it's terrible.
You were just
it still is, by the way, if anybody has kids.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. I took my kids off the bus for that reason. But they used to always sit in the very back of the bus because they were always out of sight of the bus driver, and, you know, they could do whatever they wanted. Well, I remember one day my friends and I, we were simply just like, we were going to take the back of the bus because we got on the bus first. Something as simple as literally just taking their seats, and we sat there, and the look on their face when they came in and realized that we were not going to move,
right,
and there was going to be nothing they were going to do about it.
Yeah.
You could literally see a shift in their face. And at that exact point, I was like, I am done. I'm not going to be the victim anymore. I'm not going to take it anymore.
And you weren't going to be angry anymore
and
all the
I
time.
wasn't.
Because you were so... I remember we had this conversation, I think, between our junior and senior year. Like, I'm so tired of being angry all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And life was too short. And so I think eventually, you know, those people realized that they couldn't make us feel bad about who we were anymore. It wasn't going to happen. And at that point, I had gotten a job outside of the school. And I was working Yes, I was working at a movie theater, and I was working with kids from other school districts who didn't have the same.
And I was starting to work and do those things. We were finally, it was starting to click. Wait, there is life after high school, and it doesn't look like this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
I think, especially since we've gotten older, people criticizing you for being disabled or being a different color, whatever it is, really says more about the person that's doing the making fun of than it does. I'm not the one with the problem.
Exactly.
It's the person that has to do with their own insecurities, not mine.
Right.
I'm not worried about it.
That's exactly true.
You know what I mean?
Yes, and I've tried so hard to instill that in my own kids who have dealt with their own issues of being, you know, biracial. And see, I have 6 kids, so I have a mixture. You know, some of my kids are pretty light colored skin.
Yes, absolutely.
And then there are some that are dark.
There's one that's the baby is blonde.
Yeah, blonde, blue eyes.
Yeah.
You know, how did I do that? You know, and so...
That's not how it's supposed to work.
I know, exactly. So I would honestly say it's about even, because I have 3 that are darker skin and then 3 that are lighter skin. And my darker skin kids, you know, they've had issues and things like that. But I will say the difference between my experience and theirs, and I'm so grateful for it, is the fact that so many students that were strangers to them came to their aid.
Right.
Just jumped right in.
And you've said that you think a lot, the kids are much more, and I don't know if it's the climate they've grown up in.
Right.
But they're very protective of each other.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. And there was one incident on the bus where there was the famous "Go back where you came from," which is just so
It's
idiotic.
so ridiculous.
I hate that saying so much. And before my daughter could even open her mouth, she said, like, these upperclassmen were like, "She's Native American, you idiot! Leave her alone!" You know?
They're still not using the correct.
My daughter was like, I couldn't even say anything because I was like, "Did you know
they got to you so fast?"
She's like, "They had never talked to them before," which I thought was kudos to their parents.
And like Amber was saying too, like we've talked about this before. We had our own groups of friends. You know, it wasn't just you. I had other friends. You had other friends.
Right.
And they would always come to our defense, but there was nobody who just didn't know us that would say, "Hey, like, not cool."
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. There was never just. a student who was, or a stranger who was just like, I'm not going to stand for this.
Right.
It was always our own group of friends.
And I remember too, like Mom and I talked about this a little bit in our episode. It was very hard, even though I think they meant well. There were even some teachers that you just didn't get a lot of sensitivity from.
Oh yeah.
And it was, I remember my mom would go back and forth about the restrooms not being that accessible, and they were like,
right.
well, it's as accessible as it can be, so just deal with it, you know. And we had a lot of that.
Right. There was a lot of that, and I think that it's just easier to just say, don't just deal with it. Like, what else do you expect?
Right.
And especially, like, I get it. Sometimes buildings are older and things like that, but things just need to be better.
Yeah. And it's not okay just to say, like, this is what we've got.
Just deal with it.
Yeah, that's not okay.
Yeah.
And I think for you, too, like, when because I remember several times, you just, and I feel like this sometimes, too, and it's not the same thing because is more to do about race, but you, initially, when those things were happening to you, your aunt and uncle would say things to the principal, would do the reporting. Eventually, you just got tired of having to be the one to do something about it all the time.
Right.
Like, why do I have to be the one to do anything? I'm not the one doing it wrong.
Right. And then eventually, you just, for me, for a long time, until that switch went off, I just kind of was like, this is just the way things are, and they're never going to change.
And I'm just going to be angry.
And I'm just going to have to deal with it.
Right.
And that turned into anger, and that turned into
acting out.
Yeah. Yes. And then it was like, I don't know, maturity or growing up, becoming more older and things, like, where, literally was just like, no more.
Right, we're done.
Yeah, we're done. We've done this for a long
and
time.
it's exhausting.
Yes.
It's exhausting.
It is. And now when I think about those boys, the ones who called me nachos, it got physical at some point.
It did. It really did. Yeah.
It was not just name calling.
Amber is not. I'm telling you right now, guys. She is not afraid to take on a dude.
Yeah.
So
no. So I don't want people to think, oh well, they can handle some name calling. It wasn't just name calling.
No, it got really bad.
Physical shoving, hitting, throwing things.
Right.
Name calling.
Yeah.
It was bad at some point.
And I remember we were in here. It might have been a junior or a senior. We were in a class with a batch of kids that were relentless.
Yes.
And this was in high school, guys. So we were like on our way out.
Right.
And it was bad. Like we got to a point where we didn't want to go.
Yeah, I do remember. Yeah, and it's just not fair because, why should we have to suffer, or the people have to suffer because of the bullies?
Right.
And unfortunately, that's just the way that they've always been successful at being bullies, is because a lot of people are always like, well, just, ignore them, basically turn the other cheek, just be the better person, walk away, things like that.
Right.
And, while I do teach my children sometimes, like, okay.
It depends on what it is. Yeah. For
really.
Sure. Yeah.
And I had gotten to the point where everything was just ignore it. Even the physical
and
stuff.
You can't do that. Yeah.
And so then that's what I've taught my kids, the difference of, like, okay, you're going to get name called. You're going to get, even things that have nothing to do with their race, you're always going to be something. But if it comes to the point where, it's getting physical or you're like terrified to go.
Because I would argue that a lot of teachers didn't know that was going on.
Yeah. I think, because I had the mindset of just,
I'm supposed to. This is what I'm supposed to be happy with this. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's not as bad as it used to be, and I fell into that trap too.
Yeah.
Like like if the lock on the handicap door wouldn't lock, which it didn't ever. And I would and Amber and my other friends would be like, "You need a bathroom door that locks," and I'm like, "No, at least it's an accessible bathroom." And Amber's like, "That's not enough."
Yeah.
Like my mom would be like, "Sarah, that's not enough."
Exactly.
And you all would get on that more than I would.
Oh yeah. It was because like we had to stand outside your bathroom stall to make sure.
I forgot.
Well, because I don't know if you remember the one bathroom that didn't lock. If anybody were to open that bathroom door to come into the bathroom, everybody in the hallway have a full view of what you were doing. Yeah. And it was not acceptable.
Well, and I remember, I don't even know if I've ever told you this story, but they had, when we were going from the elementary building to junior high, so 6th grade, we went to junior high.
Right.
And I was, Mom would always do this thing where she'd walk through the school to make sure things were accessible.
Right.
And there was a handicap stall that literally had no door.
I do remember that.
And they weren't going to put it back on.
I thought I was making that up in my head.
No.
I do.
Give a female privacy. And my mom literally lost it and was like,
Right.
and they said, well, we just don't know if we can get a door that'll fit. Well, it had to have had a door
Eventually,
to begin with.
Point.
And well, they put a door on there.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't have to be that hard.
No.
Just put a door on.
No.
You know, and it's not like you're asking for, you know, special treatment. You just want some privacy when using the bathroom like everybody else.
Right. And there was a gym teacher that was a female. And she was not very nice. I don't know if you remember what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But we had PE class together.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to do a weightlifting thing, and there was a weight room
on
up
the 2nd floor.
2 flights of stairs.
Right.
And I was like, how am I supposed to get up these stairs? And she's like, well, you can just crawl up.
Right.
And I was like 16 or 17, and I was like, I am not. And we were in a class with the people that like to make fun of us.
Right.
And I was like, you expect me to have my rump,
Yeah.
my ass up in the air.
Right.
When
in your gym shorts.
In my gym shorts. And Amber's like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And so she was like, well, you really shouldn't have a problem doing it. And I remember thinking, well, you're not doing it.
Yeah.
And she finally, and I think it was because my mom said something, she let us bring the weights down.
Right.
And we could lift them that way.
Right. Yeah, I think I remember that. Yeah. And you know, I think a lot of people, what they don't realize about, like, your condition and things is that your limbs don't just, like, freely move.
No, it's I'm very hard. It's very difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not like just a regular person crawling up the flight of stairs. Like, it takes a lot of effort to get one leg up a flight of stairs.
And I thought it was so inappropriate to ask a 16-year-old to have her butt in the air.
Right.
Like, do you know how many jokes you're subjecting me to?
Yeah.
And you just thought, I mean, at one point, guys, we got to a point where we would just start laughing because it was so ridiculous.
Yes.
Some of the things they were asking us to do.
And, you know, I think a lot of schools are built that way. You know, they have, you know, weight rooms. Like, I mean, I can think of my child's junior high. Their weight room is on the 2nd level of the gymnasium and things like that.
Right.
And I would hope that, you know, as schools are being built newer and newer, that, you know, things are a little bit more accessible and things like that. But it just wasn't our case. We weren't lucky in that way.
Right. Well, and I think, too, and we've talked about this as we've gotten older, is, well, it's this way, so it has to stay this way.
Right.
Or you didn't tell us. Well, really, these things should already be done.
Right.
So, I mean, you shouldn't have to, for your situation nowadays, you shouldn't have to call the principal and tell them, hey, the bus driver that drove my kids said something very inappropriate.
Yes.
You know, and your husband was even talking about how that really shook him because he couldn't believe that somebody would be that blatant.
Yes. Is it okay to talk about
that?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay. Like I said, we know you said you didn't necessarily want to get political or anything like this. Is not political.
It is not political.
But
and if you don't like it, don't listen.
Exactly.
It's a free country, guys.
So my children who are of mixed race, and like we've talked before in this episode, but they get raced a lot. You know, they don't think about the fact that they're Native American and not Hispanic. Which, I mean, if I was Hispanic, I would be very proud. I have no problem with that. It's
about getting the race right.
Right. So basically, it's like, okay, if you're gonna insult me, do it correctly. But they were getting off the bus, then our very small town that we just moved from, and the bus driver.
Not the children on the bus.
No. The bus driver, a man in his probably 60s, opened the sliding door or glass window, yelled to my children as they were walking home from school, "Build the wall," and yelled it at least two
with
or three
other
times.
kids on the bus.
With other kids, and with an earshot of other adults.
And your husband was not a.
Yeah.
And if you know her husband, Brad, he's a very good husband and he's very loving, but he is not to be messed with.
Yeah. Especially when it comes to his family. And so my kids were all like, looking around all confused because they're like, wait, is he talking? And like the older ones, they totally knew what it meant, but the younger ones were like, okay, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
And you know, they were like, is he talking to us? And so they come home, they tell me, of course, I'm instantly like mad.
You're pissed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so then I called the bus barn and I report it and I said, I want to know why this was said to my kids and blah blah. And you know, and I called the school, called the principal, called the bus barn repeatedly for like days. Not a single reply. Nothing.
No, you didn't. I didn't know that. You didn't get anything back.
I didn't get anything back.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, nope. It was like they just swept it under the rug.
Right.
It's like, oh my God, it's 2000 or it's 1994 again.
Yeah, or even later.
Yeah.
It just, and I think too, like, and that was something that I think being a minority, you know, people just don't. It's like, you know, when people talk about, you know, why does there always have to be for people with disabilities, for women, for people of color, for LGBTQ, why do there have to be these marches and why do there have to be these advocacy? Because you'll hear so many people say, like, well, I have this and I'm not out there marching or doing these things. You know, everybody. So, yeah.
And I think I mostly like the idea of your episodes being just like an educational tool for people who are like, hey, I never really thought about something as simple as when you go into a public bathroom, maybe don't choose the handicap stall.
Right.
You know, because there's been times where you've had to go really bad and you know, there's 3 stalls, but the handicap's the only one being used.
Right.
You know, granted, you've always been really understanding. You know, the look on people's face when they come out and they see you waiting, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
And if it's a pregnant lady, I'm very good about that. I'm not going to.
Well, yeah, exactly. And, you know, granted, sometimes you just have some extra space. And it's an honest thing. You never held it against anybody.
Right.
But, or if you go into a movie theater and, you know, you have the handicap spot, maybe don't take the seat right next to the handicap spot until, you know, because there's been so many times where we come in, you can sit in the handicap spot, but like out of all the seats in that row, they've chosen to sit right next to the handicap spot.
Right.
And I don't want to ask them to move, but then we can't sit by each other.
And what's the point of going to the movie?
Yeah. So it's literally just teeny tiny things like that you can think of and be like, oh, you know, I never thought about it that way. So, and it's not like I'm trying to like hold it against anybody who's ever used a handicap stall, because I definitely have. I'm just saying,
Yeah. So, and maybe from your perspective, and maybe we can kind of wrap up here too with this. Like, I just want to know. So, you participated in the Women's March for your girls. I did. You've done things with regards to race, where you've done marches and stuff for that. What is your response to people who say, well, why do they need to do that? Or why do we need those marches or that awareness? Why that's very important to you. I know why, and it's common sense to me. But what do you say to people like, well, I don't ask for attention for this. This is what I have. So why do they have to do it?
Well, in my opinion, and when I participate in things like that, it's because I don't ever want anybody to think that they're alone. And it needs to be talked about.
Because you felt very lonely.
I did.
Yeah.
And that was a big, I mean, I can't say why other people do it, but for me, that's a big part of it. Yeah. It's a sense of community. It's a sense of bringing light to an issue where for a long time for me, it felt like it needed to be swept under the rug. It just needed to be ignored. And it's like I said, it goes back to high school when that switch went off, and it's like, I'm not going to ignore it anymore.
Right.
And, and that's the biggest reason why I wanted, to participate in things like that, is because I want people to know that I'm not going to just stand by idly and watch it happen anymore. Right.
And it's just like with the podcast too. That's what I'm hoping too.
Exactly.
Like, and I do want to say, like, and I think you and I talked about this too. I want to hear from, because I know that there's people who have disabilities in minorities. Right. Black people, Native American people, whoever. Right. That, have a couple things going up against them. We want to hear their stories too.
Yes, definitely.
And
and like I said, we can laugh at ourselves. I mean, there's so many times where...
Oh, we're ridiculous.
Yeah, where, I remember you telling me about the story of eating lunch on your bench.
I will say too, and I really want, because we both really wanted to emphasize this, we talked about somebody saying build that wall, right. and the marches and the different groups and why that is necessary and it is a positive thing. I'm not looking to make this a political fight.
Right.
I do have my beliefs, but we have friends who are Republicans.
Right.
We have friends that are Democrats. And if that's what you're interested in doing, I'm probably not going to respond to that.
Oh, yeah.
But this is just our point of view
Right.
from what we're seeing.
Exactly.
And it's just to get people thinking.
Exactly.
Also, you know.
And that's why I wanted to come on, is because I don't want to sound like a whiner. I had it so hard because I mean, not everything was bad.
There was a lot of love.
There was a lot of love, and there was a lot of acceptance from people. But there were just a few that have stuck even with me to this many years later.
And it was we joke about this all the time. Ours is not an easy friendship.
Yeah.
It took a lot of heartache, and
right.
I mean, I think we talked about too when you were going through that time of being really angry. I think it was really nice to have each other, even though we may have had to separate for a little bit. And Mom and I talked about this in our podcast. My family was splitting up,
right.
When a lot of that was going on, and it was very public and painful.
Right. Yeah, because you guys were a big family in the community.
Right.
People knew
exactly.
Your family.
And I will talk about my dad. He has since passed away. And I will talk about that at some point. But I think that's important to realize too. We really utilized our friendship like everybody else does when it didn't have anything to do with our differences or our diversity. I mean, you were going through a very difficult time.
Right.
And I was, my family was falling apart.
Yes. Yeah, it was almost. I mean, have you ever heard the semi? Like, I don't want to say misery loves company, but we just found a lot of,
Thank you so much for doing this.
Yes, I'm happy to do it. I was nervous to start, but I was just talking to my best friend.
Yes, exactly. So what do you, I give people the opportunity to say how they made the most of their 50 when they come on here. So for you, you've got a husband, you've got these kids. When you look back on your life and the life that you've made and the life that you've worked for, what do you think you're most proud of with that 50? Because you made a lot of your 50 as well.
Yeah.
What do you think you're most proud of?
I honestly think I am most proud of breaking the cycle.
Can you explain a little bit what that means?
Yes. Like I said, I am a child of an addict, and
you're a lot more open about that than you used to be.
I am.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have had a lot of shame, embarrassment that comes with that. I've had a lot of heartache, a lot of scared times, of being a child of an addict. You just go through different things. And my childhood, as like I said, I lived with my grandma. She gave me a really great childhood, but there were times where it was a little unstable because just having...
She was doing the best she could.
Yeah. And having a parent who's an addict, who's in and out of your life and putting you in dangerous situations and things like that. My biggest accomplishment is that my children will never know what that feels like.
Right.
Ever. And
she has some... Excuse my language, but she has some kick-ass kids, guys. I'm telling you. They're great.
I appreciate that. They love you so much, too.
And she has a wonderful husband, too, by the way.
Well, he loves you, too.
So you think that, but that's huge for you.
That is huge for me because I never want them to know what it was like for me as a kid. Like, I don't want them to ever know what those feelings feel like, ever.
Ever.
And I am definitely not a perfect parent, and anything like that. But
she's pretty close, guys. She's very hard on herself. She's pretty close.
But I can at least say that at the end of the day,
that's what you've done to make the most.
Yeah.
And did you think when we were going through all that, I think it's really important, we talk about this all the time too, did you ever think that we would be here, happy and settled and breaking the cycle?
Honestly.
Because I think at one point you really thought, like, since my mother was this way and you were having your own struggles, that's what you were going to be.
Right. I did.
Yeah.
And it would have been really easy for me to fall down.
And you still fight that, I'm sure.
Yeah. Definitely. But in all honesty, it's like I just had it convinced that like you were gonna someday realize that you were too good to be my friend and like
oh my god,
and that you were gonna like leave me behind. But no, we've been through a lot. Marriage.
She stuck with me and I stuck with her, and
I mean some of my lowest moments you were right there, just like a text or a phone call away, and I always knew that, and I hope that that I'm there.
She's done more than enough.
Honestly.
And I have to say, I'm gonna wrap it up here with this. My 50 would not look the way that it does without you in it. Because your friendship has really pushed me. You push me to be braver. You push me to be confrontational when it calls for it. But you're also just incredibly loving, and as much as you've said about me, you're always there when I call. And you've seen me through a lot too. So thank you for helping me make the most of my 50. And I'm so proud of everything that you've done with yours.
Oh my gosh. Well, I appreciate it. And the same back to you. I honestly couldn't imagine my life without you. I don't know what that would look like.
We call each other soul sisters.
Yes.
Because I think that really is. It's on a whole different plane.
Yeah, definitely. And we always sign our text, love you to the moon and back.
Yes. So yeah, guys, we kind of went all over the place, but that's okay. I don't know what's going to be edited or what's not going to be edited by the time this plays, but thank you so much for having the conversation with me. And you know what? If you're out there and you have a friend with a disability or you're a minority and you want to touch on some of the things that we talked about, we missed the mark somewhere, please write in and I'll be happy to cover those topics. I'm sure Amber will be back at some point, but let us know what your 50 is. Thanks for coming on the podcast. We'll see you guys later.